This is the PR Podcast, a show about how public relations helps you tell your story to the world. We talk with great PR practitioners who have the skills, creativity, and just plain savvy to get their clients noticed. Now here's your host, Jody Fisher.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the PR Podcast. I'm Jody Fisher. Thanks for joining us. Well, there is so much news that that's happened in the last week or so, and so much that we could talk about here at the top of the podcast. But I thought the story that I wanted to talk about the most, because it just inspired me. And we tape this on Friday afternoons and post on Mondays. But the story that just hit this morning, it was the awarding of the annual Nobel Peace Prize, and it was given to two journalists. And it just made me feel so good. And you can Google and find out more about the two people who won the award. But to me, when I read that in my dark living room before dawn, sipping my coffee, was the fact that finally, we have a Nobel Peace Prize that goes to journalists. Doesn't go to politicians, doesn't go to some, shameless self-promoter who thinks they're changing the world. Certainly doesn't go to anyone who's running a social media network. And I don't think anyone's going to get any from that camp is going to get an award these days. But two journalists who get up every day to defend the freedom of expression, freedom of press, and to do really important work that is changing the lives of people all over the world. Like I said, you can Google and get the details, but I just thought sort of chalk one up for us journalists and ex-journalists who have done that job. And that very thankless job many days. Was so glad to see journalists recognized by the Nobel Committee getting that Nobel Peace Prize. So congratulations to them. And let's all raise a glass and rejoice. We have a terrific guest this week, so let's get right into it. Leslie Mays is a news reporter and anchor at NBC Connecticut, and she's the creator and host of Connecticut in Color, which is a program dedicated to discussing important issues for our communities of color. Her home is DC, but she got to Connecticut by way of North Carolina, taking a path that lots of journalists do, right? One city to the next. She's covered national politics as the Washington bureau producer for Time Warner cable news channels. She started her career behind the camera, and that's where we met, as a news assistant and a photographer at New York One News in New York City. She's an active member of the National Association of Black Journalists. She enjoys working with children from underserved communities. We want to hear about that, and telling stories that might often go unnoticed. Leslie, welcome to the PR Podcast.
Thank you for having me. And you forgot to add on the PR front, we met in that PR class at St. John's University.
We did. That's wow. We go even further back, right? Oh my goodness. Okay, so this is really great, and I'm so thrilled to have you on, and I'm so thrilled to have watched your career trajectory over the years. You have really done an amazing job of, I don't want to say rising up through the ranks, but you really have. I mean, you started out on the street as a videographer, right? After you were a student at St. John's, learning about communications and journalism, you then went out into the street and you're lugging a camera around and you're doing your own shoots. Tell me about what got you interested in journalism in the first place.
I think I share the story that so many journalists do, that in school, I was always chatting and talking. I was always very curious. I always wanted to know a lot. I was the one the teacher had to tell, hush, hush. I was never disruptive, but always, wanted to know a little bit more. Always was talking to somebody about what the teacher was saying, what was going on in the world. And then I think also, growing up in Washington, D.C., I was exposed to politics. I was, living amongst a very educated population. And, what so much of the news is about was right down the street for me in the form of the Capitol and, all the White House and federal agencies and everything. And so I grew up in a place where we read the newspaper at my house every day. The news was always on. My parents, from when I was a kid, wanted to make sure that I was somebody who knew what was happening in the world around me. And as I was getting to the place in junior high and high school where you had to figure out kind of what you wanted to do, I knew I wanted to do something different every day. And that's the best part about being a journalist, especially like me, a television reporter, is just that you don't know what you're going to do when you wake up in the morning. You don't know where the day is going to take you. And I went to St. John's and wanted to be in New York City for the news. And when I got the opportunity coming out of school to work at New York One, I said, well, I can go to one of these smaller markets and be on TV, when I was 22 years old, or I can stay in New York City, the place where the bulk of it happens. Some of the biggest stories, the biggest names, all kinds of things were just day-to-day news there. And so I started in New York One. They call it a news assistant, but yeah, you're basically a photographer. And there were days when I would see all 5 boroughs or 4 of the 5 boroughs running around chasing stories, carrying my own camera, shooting stories by myself, shooting stories and working alongside a reporter. And it was the best training, I think, to prepare me for this business. In that I said, well, now that I've been in New York, like it's true. If you make it here, you can make it anywhere. So I've seen it all. I've seen building collapses. I've seen steam pipe explosions. I've covered the biggest politicians. I've been in the same room as some of my favorite celebrities, and seen breaking news that would just blow your mind. So I really, really enjoyed it. And I think it set me up to do what I'm doing now, and hopefully some of the things I'll do one day down the line.
I can't agree more. And it's so great to hear your appreciation of all that. Being out in the street is a tough gig, because you're out there in the sun and the rain and the snow and the heat and the sweat and the cold, and I can't feel my toes and all that stuff. But it also gives you an appreciation for what that camera sees. It's very easy to, I think, probably sit back in a studio and say, well, can we get a picture that looks like this? It's another thing to actually know what it takes, and you know what it takes to stand out in the street and get that shot. How has that experience helped you progress and do what you do now, do it better?
Well, it certainly, number one, gives me a tremendous appreciation for the photographers that I work alongside, because I know what it's like to be carrying that camera while it's a million degrees outside, or while you can barely press the buttons because it's so cold, or because, literally your fingertips are frozen. But I think that the perspective of knowing, hey, it's not that easy to just run over and get this quick video. So and so, there's police tape in the way. There's, local neighborhood police that won't let you through. You're in a neighborhood where maybe people aren't so excited that you are there. And so it makes it harder to get the story, to get the images that we need to tell our stories on television. I'm glad that I was able to do it. I have an appreciation just for the technical time that it takes to go shoot something, edit it, and turn it around to be on television. It's gotten much better since when I started, which was not forever ago, but in the last 15 years, television, the way we do news has changed dramatically, and things are a lot faster. But it's still, the folks behind the scenes, I tell people, they're the ones that we should give a lot of the credit to, because I would look crazy on television every day, especially moving to new markets and stuff where I didn't know where I was, if I didn't have the photographer that I'm working with to kind of guide me along, because he or she had been here for years, knew where we were at, could tell me what was going on, who to talk to, how to maneuver certain things. I'm glad that I started the way that I did to end up where I am now.
I bet that they've also got to have an appreciation for you as well. Someone who's spent their life as a videographer or photographer out in the street, because that's what they want to do, and they're great at it. When they hear that you've got that background, that you're not just swinging in as someone who's, worried about how you look in the frame, and you're actually out there interested telling that story, that's gotta ring true with them as well.
I think so. I think, I try in everything that I ask a photographer to do to think about when someone was asking me to do those things, and can this be done, and how would I want to do it? And also just giving them a good amount of leeway to say, you're a professional, you know how to do this. I don't need to micromanage you and tell you to shoot every single person, or, get this video, film this blade of grass. I know that you know how to do it. So I think it's worked out pretty well for me. And I think here at NBC Connecticut, I can especially say I love the photographers that we have. It's a great team of folks who are seasoned professionals who can get it done well and quick.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now let's talk a little bit about the kind of stories that you like to tell, because what we like to talk about here on the PR podcast is, if you're a PR person, how do you more effectively pitch reporters and editors? But from your side of the desk, what kind of stories do you like to tell? What do you like to see coming at you? So you're the creator and the host of Connecticut in Color, right? Tell us about that series, that show.
So it's a series of stories all about people of color who live in the state of Connecticut. I think sometimes for some folks, when they think about Connecticut, they don't necessarily believe that it is as diverse a place as it really is. And when I came here now almost 7 years ago, I said, if I ever get the chance, I want to make sure that I amplify some of those stories and make sure that audiences of color realize that they are represented in the media. I have people come up to me all the time when I'm out and about. They're just so glad to see me as an African American woman on television. And so we try to tell stories that maybe some other folks wouldn't have necessarily told. We've done everything from talking to the first Black master hot air balloon pilot, a man named Bill Costin, who happens to live here in Connecticut, to we've got an upcoming episode where we are talking to a woman who runs a place called the Ebony Horsewomen. She's a Black woman in the equestrian world and in the middle of the north end of Hartford, which is a place that historically been economically depressed and faced a number of different challenges. She's got a stable full, a barn of horses, and gives lessons and provides camps. And so in addition to the other news that I do, which is just general assignment news of the day, which I absolutely love, like don't even get me started about talking about breaking news, the kinds of stories that I like to tell when we've got the time and when it's not day of, or things that I think open people's eyes to stuff that they might not realize exists in the communities where they live. And so I often will, thinking about PR people, I often ask folks to tell me, well, why should somebody care about this? I understand you've got a job to do as a publicist and you've got a client that you answer to, but don't come to me necessarily for to get yourself some press, and people will say that to me. I'm like, you could buy a commercial. I can send you to the people in sales, but tell me why this is something that matters to the audience, and present it in a way that offers something for me as a journalist and to the viewers, my audience. Who are the characters in your story? Who's the everyday person that someone can relate to, or the issue, or the story that you can tell me through your lens that I can then put on television and have value for other folks. And so I think it's trying to find that happy medium for me when I am presented with a story that I didn't just stumble upon on my own, but making sure that I'm telling stories that really matter. Folks are going to see this story about the Ebony Horsewomen and maybe sign their kids up for horseback riding classes, or maybe some child of color is going to think, I could fly hot air balloons one day. I want to tell stories that I know somebody's going to see this and it will mean something to them right away.
That's so great. I have a couple of things I want to follow up there on, but the most important one I want to ask you about is, do you think that journalism with the big J, right? The big organization journalism is doing a good job telling stories about communities of color, people of color? Because I can have my opinion as a white man, but I don't think my opinion counts for all that much in the context of this question. So you tell me, are journalists doing a good job telling those stories?
I think it's getting much, much, much better. In the 15 years I've been working in this business, I've seen dramatic change. Even in the handful of years that I've been here in Connecticut, I've seen significant change just in representation in terms of who is on camera, who is telling those stories, whatever the stories are. And then also the deliberate intention that I think a lot of networks now are paying to making sure that people of color are represented, and not in the worst possible light, not as a mugshot, not as something unfortunate, but telling those fun and uplifting stories, telling the stories about challenges and struggles and everything that is in between. I've got my show here. I think the diversity of my station has improved in the years since I've been here. Another station in this market, they've hired a local race and culture reporter, which 5 years ago would have been unheard of that would happen on the local level. Some of the big networks, they've got race and culture units, and so I think that there's change that's happening. But I think what's most important, well, we should also point out that now a number of the networks are led by people of color. In MSNBC, their president is a Black woman. ABC News, same thing, Black woman. And NBC, we've got a number of Hispanic people who are in extremely high positions of leadership. And so I think that is critically important in terms of facilitating the change, that you've got all kinds of people telling the stories, making decisions about coverage. And so it's getting better. There's obviously still a ways to go, but improvement is there.
Yeah, it can always get better. Fully agree with you. But I think you bring up a good point, is you need people of color in those leadership positions to drive the awareness. It's not necessarily saying you're going to go out and cover this story. I'm Hispanic and I'm going to go make you cover an Hispanic story. It's more like, hey, you need to open your eyes to these types of stories. You need to be aware of these types of stories, because you bring up a great point about the mugshot thing. And I think again, journalism with a big J, I think pays way too much attention to low level crime, like the mugshot kind of crime stuff. If it affects a neighborhood or if it affects a large group of people, different story. But like, I don't necessarily need to know the story about the guy who was caught speeding on the Southern State Parkway, or whatever. That I don't need that. Unless the guy accidentally went through somebody's bedroom, and that's a different story, right? But getting back to the point, making sure that stories about communities of color are told, I think, does flow from the top down. So to your point, great to see people of color in those leadership positions.
Yeah, that's a special thing that I never would have expected would be happening so soon, but glad the change is there.
So awesome. So awesome. Let's pivot to getting back into the newsroom a little bit. And we can stay on the stories about communities of color. You started to allude to what goes into a great story, right? It's about a person, it's about a community. Are there other elements that make a great story for you or for the TV newsroom? Are there other things that you look for when you get that pitch or you read that release?
In television, the number one thing after the interviews is just the visual part of it. And so often I'll have a great story. I'm working on something today where we're talking about a program that a council is working on here. And it's a great program, critically important. But how do I tell it on television other than just me and the person that I interviewed speaking? So I'm looking for pictures that they have of the groups that they work with or previous photos of activities, because there's no event that I can come out and shoot. There's nothing going on. And especially in these times of COVID, that all becomes so much harder, like reaching people and going into homes or buildings or people gathering. It's not there as much. So I always look for visuals. And that's something that I wish more people kind of thought about on the front end, like whatever you have that I can tell this story. When someone looks at the screen, they got to see something other than me or you, that's so important. So visuals are key. A good character, again, I think just having a good person or people to talk to, an interesting story to build everything around. Those are the things that I'm looking for. What can I see and who am I talking to that makes it special?
I've had a lot of success in the last 2 years, especially, since the onset of COVID. We're all in front of our Zooms, right? And we're even recording this on Zoom now. A lot of interviews, obviously, going on over Zoom because people can't be in the same place. It's opened up considerably from even 12 months ago. But I also find that lots of TV stations that are strapped for either time or personnel in shooting a story, and we're specifically talking about TV here, will accept the video that I send to them as long as it is shot well, lit well, mic'd well, right? It looks like something that they would shoot. It passes muster for their air. What's the opinion of you and your station on that?
We've done it before, especially early on in the pandemic where we were doing everything outside. I did a really cool story with a woman who is an African-American quilt maker, and she's done really amazing quilts. And now she was transferring that into making masks. And so she was sewing back when we all first had to go out and get them, these beautiful things that you put on your face, but we couldn't go into her house to film her workshop. And so my photographer and I gave her daughter a lesson. All right, here's how you're going to film your mom with your cell phone while she's sitting at her sewing machine, and then try to teach her kind of a one-on-one really quickly of how to shoot. So make sure you hold the camera horizontally, not up and down, number one, and then try to shoot mom wide, medium, tight. So where possible, we do that. Often, sometimes we'll get from PR folks, we'll get like a pre-filmed package. They'll try to put the story together and send it to us. That we generally virtually always will stay away from, because we do want to tell the story on our own. So we don't want anything that's really staged, no actors, but something like that where we couldn't go into the space, or perhaps had she been, in another town or another city where we couldn't reach her. Telling folks, hey, listen, this is what you do. I know you did it for the purposes of this broadcast. I think we're generally okay with a lot of that.
Okay, yeah, great. That jives with a lot of what I've heard from a lot of different TV reporters. And I will definitely stay away from packaging a story. I will send like 30 seconds of B-roll, with a couple of different shots just kind of lined up. And I'm trying to think again in terms of the newsroom and what they needed, because I used to cut tape in a newsroom. I used to have to put together that little 30-second of B-roll that kind of repeats and repeats and repeats as the VO is going by or the VO SOT is running. But I will send that to them And it's run many, many times. The B-roll that I provided, along with information, I'm not writing their piece. I'm giving the assets they need to do the reporting on the story that I'd like them to do. And it sounds like your newsroom and many newsrooms at least like and appreciate that. Whether they run it is a different story.
Yeah. Yeah. It's nice to have, but we always take a look, and we want to just make sure that we're not, again, not running a commercial. So there's a good balance. And sometimes we'll include, if it's shot by somebody else who isn't us, we make sure to put a credit there so people understand that it's not our material.
Very, very good. Good point. Put credits in all of your news releases and all of your pitches if you are sending, whether it's a photo or video, right? Always send that credit.
Or tell us what to do, because sometimes they'll have a huge graphic that doesn't go with our style, and we'll make sure something gets there that says it, but perhaps we just want it to match, the overall aesthetic of our graphics package.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Let's flip it just a little bit. What don't you like about certain pitches you get? Are there things that just turn you off, or you say, I can't do this, or I'm not doing this? Obviously, we've settled on the commercial thing, right? Obviously you're not going to run a commercial for somebody, but what are some of the things where you get a pitch and you're like, oh, this would be great if they only had, or something like that?
When there's no character, or when there's something that we come out to that we're invited to, and then I have a PR person who's next to me. I call them producers sometimes, where they will try to tell me what to do, how to do it. I'm in a gathering where you've invited the public, and I can very easily, I've been doing this since I was 18 years old, go out and find a person to just say, hey, what do you think about what's going on today? And they'll be like, well, we're going to present to you Susie, Bob, and Jane. This is who you can talk to. And that, for me, it drives me crazy. I mean, I get, when we're talking about elected officials or dignitaries or somebody who's running something, like, okay, you only can talk to this person for this amount of time, or this person generally, for whatever reason, isn't available. But a hovering PR person who tells me how to do the story, I mean, I hate to say it, but I've been at stories where I have literally rolled my eyes, like, could you put, ma'am, I can do this. I promise you. And so that's one of the things that bugs me, is that, I mean, there's a balance. You got a job to do, and I get that, but then telling me how to do my part of the job drives me crazy.
Good point. Good point. Yeah, I'm the hands-off PR guy at events. You're there. I know you're there. Great. Here's all this. I point you at the stuff and I say, go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's the way to do it.
Yeah. And then let me know when it's going to run. So I can watch for it. Well, what advice, since you have been there, what advice would you give to young people who want to be the Leslie Mays of tomorrow? I mean, you started, like you said, when you were in college, you walked your way right up through, again, I'm using the phrase, but you walked your way right up through the ranks to where you are now. Where should the journalists of tomorrow start today?
I think now the journalists of tomorrow today have so many opportunities, and that in just the time since I've graduated from college, it's become so much more accessible. There are so many ways for you to be a journalist without working for one of the legacy networks. You can be a journalist before you get that first job at a place like where I am, or, further down the line, or a little bit behind me. There are so many ways to get into this field that I love. So I would say, for anybody who's thinking about this, one, you got to know that you want to do it, because for all the fun I've had and for all the cool things I've been able to do, it is hard work. Everybody talks about the fact that, especially in television, early on, you don't make any money, and you might have to move all over the United States of America trying to get to the place where you would like to ultimately be. But if you love this work, all of those sacrifices of working the overnights, the early morning shifts, late at night, being out in the elements, it all becomes worth it, because every day you get to find out answers to things. You get to meet new people. I've met more people than probably anyone that I know, because every day I'm out in the street talking to strangers. And so it's a fun thing, but make sure that you really want to do this. So you got to be intellectually curious. You've got to be dedicated. Start wherever you are. You can become a journalist and get stuff that you can put on your resume. So starting your own podcast, starting a blog or a vlog, interviewing people for fun and posting it on your social media channels is a great way to do it. And then I think once you're in school and you're on that more formal track, continuing to do that stuff and just making sure that you intern as much as possible, I think, is critically important. Don't wait until you're a senior in college. Certainly don't wait until after you've left school, because it becomes a lot harder when they've got that requirement for college credit. But, stick with it, and work at it and find out, what space you want to be in. Do you want to do local news? Do you want to do some of this cable stuff that's out there? Do you want to do web things? Do you want to work for a magazine online? It's the greatest. I love what I do. I've never changed my feeling about that. I can't imagine doing anything else, but work at it and stick with it and you'll get there.
Well, it is no surprise that you are as successful as you have been. And I'm really glad that we got this opportunity to speak with you. Thank you so much, Leslie.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we are going to segue into the rapid fire question portion of our podcast here. This is where we have a little fun. We steal a page from inside the actor studio, ask our guests a series of rapid fire questions just meant to elicit a simple little response. So with your indulgence, we're going to kick it off. Here we go. Rapid fire question number 1. What is your favorite news source?
I'd say the New York Times and anything NBC.
There you go. That's the right answer. Rapid fire question number 2. What is your favorite social media platform?
Definitely Instagram. I love the pictures and the little captions that go along with it.
Awesome. Rapid fire question number 3. Coffee or alcohol?
I'm trying to do less and less coffee these days. So I do enjoy a good glass of wine in moderation every once in a while.
Excellent. Excellent. Rapid fire question number 4. And this should be a good one for a reporter. What is your favorite on the run food?
I got a bag of snacks. There's 2. I've got 2 answers for all of these, but probably fruit roll-ups and string cheese. Strange combination, but they travel well and it's got that sweet savory thing. There you go.
Nice. Love it. Love it. All right. And rapid fire question number 5. This is our philosophical one. What do you want to be after you finish this career?
I don't think you ever finish being a journalist. I think I'll be asking questions and trying to get answers for as long as I live. But if I weren't a journalist, I think I'd probably be either a lawyer or a jewelry designer.
Ooh, all right. Those are some good ones. I like it. All right. Well, Leslie, again, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Please let people know how they can find you online.
On social media, I am at Leslie Mays, Mays spelled with an E, Mayes, TV on everything.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Leslie. And thank you everyone for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the show, connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at the PR Podcast, and send us a question or a comment. Our intro is by Christopher Appold. You can find him and his fantastic photography on Instagram at Christopher_APPOLDT. Check him out there and hire him for all your photography needs. You can find me online at Jody Fisher on all the socials and online at jodyfisherpr.com. We'll see you next time on the PR Podcast.